Millionaire makes a secret donation this Christmas, but what he receives in return will change everything. The shocking truth will leave you speechless. Jonathan clenched his fists as the phone call ended. The voice on the other end had been too polite, too professional, and yet there was no mistaking the disappointment behind the words. He had just been informed that the charity gala he had sponsored for years was facing serious financial difficulties. His company's donation was supposed to be the lifeline, but it had been mismanaged, and now the event was in jeopardy. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years funding these charity projects, playing the role of the benevolent millionaire, handing out checks to appear generous. But here he was, stuck in a mess of his own making, and with a reputation to protect. If the event failed, the media would have a field day, turning his generosity into a headline of scandal. Jonathan had been living in a bubble of success for so long that it never occurred to him the money he tossed around could be wasted. But this felt different. Something gnawed at him, something he couldn't ignore. The event's failure might cost him a lot more than just a few PR hits. It might cost him everything he had built. "Think, Jonathan," he muttered to himself, pacing back and forth in his penthouse. The truth was he felt disconnected from it all. His wealth, his influence, nothing gave him the satisfaction it once did. The Christmas season, which should have been a time of giving, had only left him feeling emptier. He stopped in front of his desk, staring at the pile of reports. One of them stood out, a letter from a small charity that had been struggling for funding. They needed help, desperately. Without thinking, Jonathan grabbed his phone and made a call. "Send them the money," he instructed his assistant. "A large donation, no strings attached." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? That amount could—" "Just do it. And don't mention my name." The words came out sharper than he had intended, but Jonathan didn't care. He didn't need recognition for this. He needed to do something meaningful, something that would make him feel something. He had money to spare, and he could afford to make a difference, even if nobody ever knew. He sat back in his chair, his mind still spinning. He hadn't expected to feel a flicker of hope after making the decision. But there was a glimmer of something real. Ingrid sat at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the stack of overdue bills in front of her. The numbers blurred together as she tried, once again, to make sense of her finances. Rent, utilities, grocery bills, none of it added up. There was always more month left than money, and it never seemed to end. Her daughter, Lily, ran into the room, her face bright despite the cold weather outside. "Mom, can we get a Christmas tree this year? The one we had last year was so pretty." Ingrid's heart tightened. The memory of last year's Christmas felt like a lifetime ago. Before her husband passed away, before the hospital bills piled up, before she'd been forced to work double shifts just to keep food on the table. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt like she had enough, and the idea of Christmas decorations felt out of reach. "I don't know, sweetie," Ingrid said, forcing a smile. "Maybe we can make one from what we have at home." Lily's face fell, but she quickly brightened. "Okay, Mom, as long as we're together, it's fine." Ingrid's heart ached. It wasn't just about the tree. It was about the way Lily had learned to accept less, how her dreams had been stripped down to mere survival. And Ingrid, no matter how hard she tried, couldn't give her the kind of Christmas she deserved. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. She stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans, and walked to the door. A letter was waiting for her, no return address, just a simple note inside. It read, "You've been selected to receive a holiday gift donation, sponsored by a private benefactor." Ingrid stared at the letter, confused. A donation? It wasn't the first time she'd seen messages like this in the past. Many charities sent out offers around the holidays, hoping to get something in return. But this one felt different. No strings attached. Just a gift. She turned the letter over, half expecting there to be fine print or a catch. But there was nothing. No conditions. Just the promise of help. She didn't know whether to be suspicious or relieved. Could it be real? She had heard of random acts of kindness, but this felt too good to be true. And yet, something inside her told her to trust it. Maybe this was the break she had been hoping for. For herself. For Lily. That night, Ingrid couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing with questions. Who would do this for them? Why? She thought back to the way things had been, to the life they had before her husband's death, when they had managed, when they weren't always on the edge of disaster. She thought about the years she had spent working herself into the ground, about the sacrifices she had made just to keep them afloat. Now, this stranger's generosity seemed like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in a sea of uncertainty. But she couldn't ignore the doubts that gnawed at her. What did they want in return? The next morning, Ingrid went to check her bank account. Her heart skipped a beat as the numbers appeared. A substantial deposit had been made into her account, enough to cover months of rent, bills, groceries, and most importantly, to give Lily a Christmas that felt real. She sat down at the kitchen table again, staring at the screen. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe. This money would change everything. No more worrying about what to cut from the budget, no more scraping by. She could give Lily the Christmas she deserved. She could finally breathe. But then a thought crossed her mind. What was the cost? There had to be a reason. No one gave away that much money without expecting something in return. The nagging question, who was this benefactor, lingered in her mind. But right now, the answer didn't matter. Not yet. She had to make sure Lily had what she needed. For once, she wouldn't have to say no. As she sat there, staring at the bank statement, Ingrid felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The days leading up to Christmas were a blur for Ingrid. She went to work, spent evenings wrapping the few presents she could afford, and kept her focus on the one thing she had been able to give Lily, the Christmas she deserved. Yet, despite her outward calm, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The donation was more than just money, it was a lifeline. But who was behind it? The mystery of it all kept her awake at night. Was it someone who had seen her struggle, who had known her name? Or was it just a random act of kindness from someone she would never meet? Ingrid tried to push the questions aside, reminding herself that the money would help. It would ease the burden. It would allow them to move forward, even if just for a little while. But every time she looked at Lily, her innocent smile, the way she lit up when Ingrid mentioned the Christmas tree, Ingrid wondered if this was the moment everything would change. On Christmas Eve, Ingrid made her way to the small, modest church in their neighborhood, where they had attended Mass for years. It wasn't much, a simple building with creaky pews and cracked windows, but it was their place. As she and Lily sat down, the warmth of the church felt like a stark contrast to the cold world outside. The service began, and as the choir sang, Ingrid couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. For the first time in months, she wasn't worried about what they didn't have. She wasn't thinking about the bills piling up or the fear that still lingered in the back of her mind. She was here, with her daughter, in the one place that had always felt like home. After the service, Ingrid waited outside for Lily, who was talking to one of the volunteers. She smiled, watching her daughter interact with the others, her joy infectious. A voice behind her startled her. Ingrid. She turned around to find Jonathan standing there, his expensive coat contrasting sharply with the simple surroundings. The surprise on his face was impossible to miss. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Ingrid froze, momentarily speechless. She had no idea what he was doing at this church, let alone why he was speaking to her. She stammered, unsure of what to say. I didn't know you were here. I've been coming for a while, he said. I wanted to see where the donation went. Ingrid's heart skipped a beat. This man, this millionaire, was standing in front of her. The one who had anonymously given them the money. The same man who had taken it upon himself to change their lives. Her mind raced. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Jonathan had made a donation, helped her, and yet, standing there, he didn't seem like the man she had imagined. His presence was different, more human somehow. I didn't expect, she began, still unsure of what to say. I didn't expect it either, Jonathan interrupted. But something about you and your daughter, it made me think. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to do something. Ingrid didn't know how to respond. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and for the first time, she realized that this wasn't just a transaction. It was something deeper, something more complex. He hadn't just given money. He had done something far more significant. He had reached out in a way she had never imagined. I'm grateful, Ingrid finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I still don't understand. Why me? Jonathan looked at her, his eyes searching. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I needed to see what my money could really do. Maybe I needed to know if it was making a difference. The words hung in the air between them. Ingrid's mind was spinning, trying to piece together the puzzle of this strange encounter. She had accepted the donation with hesitation, unsure of what strings were attached. And yet now, standing in front of the man who had made it possible, it felt like something was shifting. I'm sorry, Jonathan continued. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just wanted to meet you, to see who you were, to know that my money wasn't just going into some system, but to real people. Ingrid looked down at her hands, suddenly feeling the weight of everything. Her pride, her fear, her gratitude, it all mixed together, creating a tension she couldn't shake. She had spent so long building walls around herself, trying to do everything on her own, that she had forgotten what it felt like to accept help, to be vulnerable. And yet, standing there, she realized that maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for, a chance to let go, to trust, to let someone in. Lily approached them, tugging at Ingrid's sleeve, her face lit up with excitement. Mom, look, they're handing out gifts at the back. Can we go? Ingrid smiled down at her daughter, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like the weight of the world had lifted, even if just for a moment. She looked up at Jonathan. Thank you, she said, the words coming more easily now. Thank you for everything. Jonathan nodded, his gaze softening. He didn't need to say anything more. They stood there for a moment, as the church bells rang out into the night, signaling the start of Christmas. It was the first time in years that Ingrid felt a quiet sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The days that followed Christmas were filled with a sense of surreal calm. Ingrid felt a weight lift off her shoulders with each passing day, the sense of security growing as she could finally breathe without the constant worry of where the next meal would come from or how the bills would be paid. The donation was like a miracle, and though she couldn't fully grasp the reasons behind it, she had come to accept it as a gift that had given her a second chance. Lily was thrilled by the Christmas tree they had decorated together, and though it wasn't grand, it sparkled with the love and effort they had put into it. Ingrid marveled at her daughter's ability to find joy in the simplest things. But still, something tugged at her. The mystery of Jonathan lingered in the back of her mind. What did he truly expect in return? It wasn't just the money that unsettled her. It was his presence, the unexpected way he had entered their lives. She couldn't help but wonder if he had ulterior motives. A week after Christmas, Ingrid received an invitation to a private gala, a lavish event held at one of the city's most upscale hotels. She stared at the ornate envelope, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. It was from Jonathan's company, an invitation to an exclusive charity event. It wasn't a coincidence. She knew this invitation was his way of involving her, of connecting the dots between the money and his name. She felt uneasy. It was as if he wanted something more, and this invitation was his way of ensuring she showed up. Ingrid sat on the edge of her bed, her mind racing. She hadn't been to an event like this in years, not since her husband had passed. The thought of attending made her uncomfortable. She was out of her element in this world of wealth and power. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. Maybe she had questions she needed answered. Maybe this was her chance to understand why Jonathan had chosen her and Lily. With a sigh, Ingrid made up her mind. She had to go, if only to make sense of it all. For once, she would step into a world she had never been a part of, a world that felt as foreign to her as the life she had once dreamed of. The night of the gala, Ingrid stood in front of the full-length mirror in her modest apartment, adjusting the dress she had borrowed from a friend. It was simple, elegant, nothing like the designer gowns worn by the women at these types of events, but it would have to do. She smoothed out the wrinkles and took one last look at herself. The woman who stared back was familiar, but also distant, like someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Mom, you look beautiful. Lily's voice rang out from the living room. Ingrid smiled, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. Thanks, sweetie, she replied, her voice soft. Lily ran into the room, holding a small gift she had wrapped with great care. I made this for you. For tonight. I hope you like it. Ingrid crouched down to her daughter's level, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Thank you, Lily. You're the best Christmas gift I could ever ask for." Lily beamed, and Ingrid kissed her forehead before standing up. "I'll be home soon, okay? I'll bring something special for you." Lily nodded eagerly. "I'll be waiting for you, Mom." Ingrid walked out of the apartment, her thoughts heavy. As she made her way to the venue, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a world that didn't understand her. The tall buildings, the flashing lights of the hotel's grand entrance, the doormen in tuxedos. All of it felt like something out of a dream, one she didn't belong to. Inside, the gala was everything she had expected, opulent and glamorous, with people mingling in high-end designer attire, sipping champagne and discussing matters that seemed far removed from the life she led. Jonathan was nowhere to be found, but Ingrid wasn't sure she wanted to look for him. She wasn't sure she was ready to face him or whatever expectations he might have. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ingrid?" She turned around, startled, and found Jonathan standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He wore a well-tailored suit, and the moment he saw her, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. Ingrid hesitated for a moment before answering. "I didn't know what to expect, but I thought it was time I came." Jonathan stepped closer, his gaze flicking down to the simple dress she wore. There was no judgment in his eyes, only curiosity. "You look good," he said simply. Ingrid felt a wave of discomfort wash over her. The attention felt strange, almost invasive. She wasn't used to this world, to this kind of attention. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight. Jonathan gestured for her to follow him, and she reluctantly walked alongside him through the crowd. They passed through groups of people who barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations fading into the background. Ingrid's mind was consumed with questions. Why had Jonathan invited her? Why was he still investing so much in their lives? They stopped at a quiet corner, away from the noise and clinking of glasses. Jonathan turned to face her, his expression softening. "You don't belong here, do you?" he asked, his voice low. Ingrid blinked, taken aback by the honesty in his words. "No, I don't." Jonathan nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about you and your daughter, about what I'm doing and why." Ingrid's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but something in Jonathan's tone made her listen carefully. "I didn't give you that money just to help you survive," he said quietly. "I wanted to give you something more. I wanted to give you a chance to live the life you deserve." The weight of his words hit Ingrid like a wave. She had always thought of survival, of getting by. But now, in this moment, she realized that Jonathan wasn't offering just money. He was offering her a future. Ingrid stood frozen in the dimly lit corner of the gala, the weight of Jonathan's words sinking deep into her chest. A chance to live the life you deserve. The phrase echoed in her mind, its implications both powerful and terrifying. She had never considered her life in those terms. Survival had always been the goal, getting through another day, making sure Lily had food and warmth. But now Jonathan was offering something bigger, something that felt both like a gift and a burden. She didn't know how to respond, how to voice the question that had been building inside her since their first meeting. What does he really want from me? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she found herself swallowing back the fear, the confusion, the uncertainty. Jonathan seemed to sense her hesitation. He looked at her for a moment, studying her face as though trying to gauge her reaction. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly. "I didn't expect it to be easy for you." Ingrid nodded, still unsure of where to take the conversation. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand answers, to ask why he had chosen her, of all people. What had made her and Lily worthy of this kind of help? But another part of her, the part that had always been afraid of reaching for more than she could grasp, told her to hold back, to retreat into the life she knew. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence between them. Jonathan's eyes softened. "You don't have to say anything right now, but I need you to understand something." He paused, then looked directly into her eyes, his gaze steady. "This is about more than charity, Ingrid. It's about giving you and your daughter a chance to live without constantly worrying about surviving. I want to help you build a future, but you have to let me in. You have to let me show you what that future could look like." Ingrid felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had spent her entire life learning how to live on her own, how to navigate the world without anyone's help. She had pride, a fierce kind of independence that had been born out of necessity. To accept Jonathan's offer felt like surrendering that identity, like admitting that she wasn't strong enough to make it on her own. But then she thought of Lily, the way her daughter had learned to be content with less, how she smiled even when there was nothing to smile about. She thought about how many times Lily had asked her why they couldn't have more, why they couldn't live like the family she saw on TV. Ingrid had never had the answers to give her. And now, here was Jonathan, offering more than money. He was offering the possibility of a life where Lily could have what she deserved, a life filled with hope, with opportunity, with the promise of something better. But at what cost? Ingrid couldn't shake the thought. She wasn't naive. She knew that nothing in this world was truly free, especially not from someone like Jonathan. What was the price of a life that wasn't constantly defined by scarcity? "I need time," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "I can't just accept something like this without understanding what it means." Didn't press her further. He simply nodded, his gaze steady. "Take all the time you need. Just know that the offer is real. And if you decide to take it, you won't be alone in this." Ingrid felt a rush of conflicting emotions. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that his offer came from a place of genuine care, that this wasn't some calculated move to make her indebted to him. But she had been disappointed before, let down by people who had promised to make things better, only to end up with nothing but empty words. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She wasn't ready to make any decisions tonight, not in the whirlwind of emotions that this unexpected encounter had stirred within her. Jonathan studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "I'll be here when you're ready." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Ingrid standing alone in the corner, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision that loomed ahead. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Ingrid could barely concentrate on anything. She walked through the gala, surrounded by laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses, but it all felt distant. She was torn between two worlds, the one she knew, where survival was all that mattered, and the one Jonathan was offering, a world where money and influence could change everything. She couldn't help but wonder, could she really leave behind everything she had worked for? Could she trust someone like Jonathan to help her without expecting something in return? Lily's face flashed in her mind. Her daughter, with her innocent dreams, her hopeful eyes. Ingrid didn't want to disappoint her. She didn't want to be the kind of mother who always had to say no. But this decision, this offer, was bigger than just her. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything she had worked so hard for, the independence, the pride, the belief that she could do it on her own. But could she? Could she keep pretending that doing it alone was the only way? Could she keep sacrificing the chance for a better life just because she was too afraid to let go? Ingrid took a deep breath, the noise of the gala fading into the background. She had a choice. She could accept Jonathan's help, or she could keep struggling, keep fighting an uphill battle that might never end. But the thought of Lily, of the life she wanted for her daughter, made her realize something important. Maybe this time, it wasn't about her pride. Maybe it was about what was best for the person she loved most in this world. She walked out of the gala, her mind racing, her heart pounding, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she might be walking towards something better, something real. The days following the gala were a blur of uncertainty. Ingrid's mind never seemed to settle. The image of Jonathan's calm expression, his words about a better future, haunted her at every turn. She tried to focus on her daily routine, on the small moments that made life bearable. Lily's laughter, their evenings together after school, the quiet joy of having a roof over their heads. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the nagging question that weighed on her heart. Was Jonathan's offer really the answer? Or was it a trap, a way to pull her deeper into a world she didn't understand? She found herself looking at the invitation to the gala, tucked away in the drawer where she kept the few things that mattered. She hadn't responded, hadn't told Jonathan whether or not she would accept his help. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time she thought about saying yes, something inside her hesitated. She was afraid of losing herself, of losing the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. But there was another fear, one that cut deeper. The fear of letting Lily down, of staying stuck in the same cycle of struggle, of never being able to give her daughter the future she deserved. "Mom?" Ingrid looked up from her thoughts, startled. Lily was standing in the doorway, holding a small stuffed animal in her hands. "Hey, sweetie, what's up?" Ingrid asked, forcing a smile. Lily walked into the room and climbed onto the couch beside her mother. "I made this for you," she said, holding out the stuffed animal. Ingrid took the small bear from her daughter's hands, feeling a pang of tenderness in her chest. It was one of Lily's creations, simple but filled with love. "It's beautiful, baby." "Thank you." Lily smiled, her eyes bright with pride. "I made it because you're my superhero. You're the best mom in the world, and I know that whatever you decide, it's going to be okay." Ingrid felt her throat tighten. Her superhero. The words felt like a weight on her heart, as if Lily had placed the world in her hands. The weight of a mother's love, the responsibility of being the one to shape her daughter's future, suddenly felt heavier than ever. "You're right," Ingrid whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I'll make it okay. I promise." Lily leaned against her mother, her small body warm and comforting. Ingrid closed her eyes, letting the moment of peace wash over her. She had spent so much time worrying about the future, about the choices she had yet to make, that she had almost forgotten the most important thing: her daughter, her family. Whatever happened, she would protect Lily. She would do whatever it took. And then, in the quiet of that moment, Ingrid made her decision. The next morning, Ingrid called Jonathan. Her hands shook as she dialed his number, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her. She had spent days thinking it over, weighing the risks, the fears, the doubts. But she knew, deep down, that the right choice wasn't about maintaining her pride or her independence. It was about giving Lily a chance at something better. And that chance, she realized, came through accepting Jonathan's offer. The phone rang once, twice, and then his voice came through the line. "Ingrid?" "Jonathan, it's Ingrid," she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I've made my decision." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What decision?" "I'm ready to accept your help," Ingrid said, the words coming out more easily than she had expected. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want a better life for my daughter. And if this is the way to give her that chance, then I'll take it." Jonathan's voice softened. "I'm glad to hear that, Ingrid. You won't regret it. I'll make sure you and Lily have everything you need. You're not alone in this." Ingrid felt a rush of emotion at his words. She had feared that accepting his help would come with strings attached, that it would change the way she saw herself, or worse, the way Lily saw her. But now, with Jonathan's assurance, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something that could break the cycle of struggle they had been trapped in for so long. "I'll be in touch," Jonathan continued. "We'll take it one step at a time. But this is the start of a new chapter for both of you." Ingrid took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She had made the decision, and now she had to follow through, no matter where it led. Later that day, Ingrid sat down with Lily, holding the stuffed bear in her hands. She looked at her daughter, the person who had kept her going all these years, and smiled. "Lily, I've made a decision," Ingrid began, her voice soft but firm. "I'm going to do everything I can to make our lives better. We're going to have a future, a real future. I'm going to take the help that was offered to us." Lily's eyes widened, her face lighting up with hope. "Really, Mom?" Ingrid nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. "Yes, really. And I promise you, we're going to make it. Together." Lily threw her arms around her mother, her small body trembling with joy. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Ingrid hugged her tightly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about the struggles ahead. She wasn't focused on the fear of the unknown. She was simply holding her daughter, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. As she pulled away from the embrace, Ingrid knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road that led to a future where hope, not fear, guided their steps. And for the first time in a long time, Ingrid felt like she was walking in the right direction. The days after Ingrid's decision passed quickly, like the turning of pages in a book she had barely begun to read. Jonathan kept his word. His team reached out, arranging the first steps in what would become a new chapter for Ingrid and Lily. Everything seemed to move in fast forward, as if the world was speeding up to make room for the future they were about to create. But in the back of Ingrid's mind, a persistent unease clung to her like a shadow. She had chosen to take Jonathan's help, but she didn't know the full cost of that choice. He had made it sound simple. Just trust me, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. But Ingrid couldn't shake the nagging thought that there was more to it than that. No one did things for free, especially not someone like Jonathan. And though he assured her that her independence wouldn't be compromised, she couldn't ignore the feeling that this was only the beginning of a larger plan. One that would eventually demand something from her, something she wasn't prepared to give. Jonathan was everywhere now, his team, his associates, his influence. And in a way, Ingrid felt like she was drowning in it. She hadn't asked for the lifestyle that Jonathan was offering, the world of high-powered business deals, private lunches, and charity galas. Yet, she found herself swept up in it, unable to turn back. She couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment it all started to feel too much. It was subtle, like a creeping cold that she hadn't noticed until it was already there, settling in her bones. But none of that mattered when she looked at Lily. Lily, who was starting to blossom in this new world, who was beginning to see what it meant to have options. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to worry about whether there would be enough food for the week or where they would sleep. Lily had a chance to dream bigger, and for that, Ingrid knew she could never go back. Ingrid sat at the kitchen table, the new house quiet around her. She was alone, the noise of the world outside muted by the heavy curtains she'd drawn. Her thoughts circled back to Jonathan's offer, to the questions she had yet to ask. What is it you want from me, Jonathan? What do you really expect in return? The phone on the table vibrated, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Jonathan's assistant, confirming another meeting. Ingrid had long ago stopped questioning why she was always being asked to attend these events, these high-profile gatherings where the air was thick with wealth and ambition. But something about this one felt different. She wasn't sure what had changed, but she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. She put the phone down without replying. No more meetings, not today. She needed time to breathe, time to figure out if she was still in control of her own choices, or if she was being swept along by a current too strong to fight. Later that afternoon, Jonathan called. Ingrid, his voice was warm but direct as always. I wanted to check in. How are you feeling? I know things have been moving fast. Ingrid hesitated. She wanted to say something, wanted to ask the questions that had been building in her mind. But she knew this wasn't the time. Jonathan had always been gracious, always patient. But there was an undercurrent to his words, a pressure she couldn't quite place. I'm fine, she said finally, her voice steady. Everything is happening so fast. It's hard to keep up sometimes. Jonathan's tone softened. I understand. But Ingrid, remember, you've made a decision, and I'm here to make sure it works out. You and Lily are going to have a life that most people only dream of. All I need from you is trust. The word trust struck her like a physical blow. Trust was a currency she had spent too many times in the past, only to see it squandered. Jonathan's words seemed genuine, but could she really trust him? Was he asking for her trust because he wanted something more from her? Trust, she repeated quietly, as if testing the word in her mouth. I'll need more than that, Jonathan. I need to know what I'm really getting into. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Ingrid couldn't tell if he was surprised by her response or if he was carefully choosing his next words. You're getting a future, Ingrid, he said, his voice a little more firm now. A future where you and Lily don't have to struggle every single day. That's what you're getting. Ingrid swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. She had chosen this. She had chosen to take the help, to trust that it was the right path. But now that she was here, she wasn't so sure. I understand, she said quietly, her mind spinning. But I need time to really think about what this means. For me, for Lily, for both of us. Jonathan was silent for a moment, then finally spoke. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. But remember, Ingrid, what we've offered you doesn't come around every day. It's a chance, a real chance." Ingrid's grip tightened on the phone as she listened to his words, the weight of them sinking deep into her chest. She had made her choice, but now, in this moment of quiet uncertainty, she wasn't so sure that choice hadn't come with a price she hadn't yet fully understood. As she ended the call, the question lingered in her mind, unanswered and unresolved. What was Jonathan really offering her? Ingrid looked out the window, where Lily was playing in the yard. She was free, for now, unaware of the tension that hung in the air, of the choices her mother was being forced to make. Ingrid had promised to give Lily a future. But at what cost? The days bled into each other, a blur of glossy invitations, sparkling cocktails, and smiles that felt too polished to be real. Ingrid tried to lose herself in the swirl of it all, focusing on Lily's excitement over the new school and the small luxuries she never thought possible. But with each passing day, a darker truth began to settle in the back of Ingrid's mind. The future Jonathan had promised her, one of stability, opportunity, and freedom, was starting to feel like something she hadn't fully earned. She couldn't shake the unease that had grown since she'd accepted his help. He had been generous, undeniably so, but Ingrid had begun to see that generosity in a different light. No one gave anything away for free. There was always a price, always something that had to be repaid. And with Jonathan, Ingrid felt like she was walking a tightrope, with no clear understanding of what he expected from her in return. Lily, oblivious to her mother's growing concern, thrived in her new environment. She had friends, real friends, and Ingrid saw her daughter's confidence bloom as she navigated this new life. It was everything Ingrid had wanted for her, everything she had fought for. But at what cost? She had barely slept the night before, her mind restless as she lay awake, turning Jonathan's words over and over. "You'll get used to it," he had said. "Trust me." But what if trust was all he really wanted? And what if, in the process, Ingrid was losing herself? The question hung over her as she sat in the small kitchen, a cup of coffee cooling in front of her. She glanced at the clock. Jonathan had asked her to meet him again, this time at his office. She had resisted at first, but there was something about the invitation, the way it had come across in his message, that made her feel like she didn't have a choice. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Her phone vibrated with a text from Lily's new teacher, confirming her attendance at the upcoming parent-teacher conference. Ingrid smiled, feeling a brief moment of peace. The world she had built for Lily was already beginning to take shape. But then the thought of Jonathan's office, of the meeting that awaited her, stole that peace away. When Ingrid arrived at Jonathan's sleek, modern office building, she felt a strange sense of dread wash over her. The lobby was pristine, the marble floors gleaming under the soft light. Everything about the place screamed wealth, power, and control, and yet Ingrid felt as if she didn't belong. She had worked hard to survive, to provide for her daughter, but this world of privilege and excess, felt like a foreign planet. Ms. Torres, the receptionist, greeted her, her voice as smooth and polished as the surroundings. "Mr. Carver is expecting you." Ingrid nodded, unable to find words. The woman's smile was too perfect, too rehearsed, and Ingrid felt a pang of discomfort in her chest. She followed the receptionist down a long hallway, the click of her heels echoing off the marble floor. At the end of the hall, a large wooden door opened to reveal Jonathan's office. It was as imposing as the rest of the building, vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Jonathan stood by the window, staring out at the view. He turned as Ingrid entered, his face lighting up with a smile that seemed both welcoming and calculating. "Ingrid, I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Please have a seat." She sat down cautiously, her mind racing. This wasn't just a business meeting. It felt like something else, something bigger, and she was afraid she wasn't ready for it. Jonathan took a seat across from her, folding his hands in front of him. "How have you been adjusting?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was an intensity behind his words that made Ingrid uneasy. It's been overwhelming, Ingrid admitted, her fingers tapping nervously on her knee. There's so much happening so fast. I'm just trying to keep up. Jonathan's eyes softened slightly, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. I understand. Change is always difficult, but I want you to know you made the right choice. I'm offering you a chance to have the life you and Lily deserve. Ingrid's throat tightened. The life we deserve. The words sounded so simple, so easy, but they didn't feel simple. She had spent years fighting to get by, and now that someone like Jonathan was offering her a way out, she couldn't help but wonder if there was a cost she hadn't yet seen. I don't doubt that, Ingrid said carefully, meeting his eyes. But I need to understand something. What do you want from me, Jonathan? What's the catch? Jonathan didn't flinch. He sat back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. No catch, Ingrid. Just a simple arrangement. You get the help you need, and in return, you'll be a part of something bigger. A future for you and Lily. One that will ensure you never have to struggle again. Ingrid's mind raced, the walls of the room seeming to close in around her. There was a hint of something in his words that felt off, a part of something bigger. Was it just charity, or was there something else? And what does that future look like? Ingrid asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. It looks like power, influence, security. The kind of future that you can't even imagine right now. But trust me, Ingrid, it's everything you've ever wanted. Ingrid felt a chill settle in her chest as the full weight of his words sank in. She wasn't just accepting his help. She was becoming part of his world, a world where her every move would be tied to his success. As she left the meeting, the door closing behind her with a soft click, Ingrid felt a deep sense of foreboding. She had taken Jonathan's offer, but now she was beginning to realize that the price of that offer was far greater than she had ever anticipated. The days after her meeting with Jonathan felt heavy, as if a weight had been added to Ingrid's shoulders that she couldn't shake. The promises he had made in that sleek office now seemed like a chain, not a gift. She had thought she was making the right choice, securing a future for herself and Lily, but the reality of it was starting to gnaw at her. The more Jonathan spoke of the future he was offering, the more Ingrid began to question if it was the future she truly wanted. Lily, on the other hand, was thriving in her new world. She had friends at her new school, and Ingrid could see the lightness in her daughter's eyes. The joy that came from not having to worry about where their next meal would come from, or if the electricity would stay on. But that joy was something Ingrid couldn't fully share. Every time she looked at her daughter, she felt the weight of the decision she had made. Was this truly the life Lily needed? Or was she setting them both up for something more dangerous? Ingrid had been keeping her distance from Jonathan, not because she didn't appreciate what he had done, but because the more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't understand his motivations. Every interaction with him, every smile, every casual remark felt like a part of a larger game she hadn't been invited to play in. That night, Ingrid sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers Jonathan had given her during their last meeting. He had explained that they were just formalities, legal documents, agreements to ensure everything was in order. But there was one document that caught her attention, one that she hadn't noticed before, a contract outlining the nature of her arrangement with Jonathan. It was vague, intentionally so. There were no specific details about what he expected, only broad strokes about her commitment and participation in various ventures. It made Ingrid uneasy. She had signed papers before, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt like she was committing not just her future, but her identity. A sudden noise from the hallway startled her. It was Lily, standing at the edge of the doorframe, watching her with wide, curious eyes. Ingrid quickly folded the papers and tucked them into a drawer, her heart racing. She didn't want to show her daughter the uncertainty she was feeling. Not now. Not when Lily was so happy. "Mom, are you okay?" Lily asked softly, her voice tentative. Ingrid smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Just thinking about some things." Lily didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the matter. Instead, she walked over and hugged her mother tightly. Ingrid held her daughter close, grateful for the warmth, but also feeling the sting of the growing distance between them. a distance that had nothing to do with Lily herself, but everything to do with the choices Ingrid had made. Later that evening, Ingrid received another text from Jonathan's assistant, inviting her to another dinner meeting. This time, it was at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. It wasn't just any dinner. It was a gathering of powerful figures from various industries, a chance for Jonathan to showcase his network, to prove his influence. And once again, Ingrid was caught in the middle, expected to attend, to be seen, to be part of his world. She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. She had grown accustomed to these invitations, but each one felt more like a summons than a request. It was as if she had been pulled into a web, and no matter how hard she tried to escape, it tightened around her. Lily was already asleep by the time Ingrid left. She kissed her daughter's forehead, her lips lingering for a moment longer than usual. The ache in her chest was undeniable. She was doing this for Lily, for their future. But the question that had been haunting her since that first meeting with Jonathan refused to leave her mind. What was Jonathan truly asking for in return? The restaurant was opulent, the kind of place where the silverware gleamed under the soft lighting and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and freshly uncorked wine. Jonathan was already there, seated at a private table in the back. As Ingrid approached, he stood to greet her, his smile warm but somehow distant. "I'm glad you could make it, Ingrid," he said, his tone both reassuring and commanding. "Tonight, you'll meet some very important people." Ingrid nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about introductions. It was about something else, something she still didn't understand. They exchanged pleasantries as the evening unfolded, the conversation drifting from one topic to the next. But Ingrid couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to the contract, to the unspoken promises that had been made, to the strange sense that she was slowly losing control over her own life. She glanced around at the faces of the other guests, high-powered executives, influential politicians, and socialites, all gathered around the table. They seemed so comfortable in their world, so assured of their place in it. Ingrid felt like an outsider. She didn't belong here, and yet she was being pulled deeper into Jonathan's orbit with each passing moment. At one point during the dinner, Jonathan leaned toward her, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You're doing well, Ingrid. I hope you see that. You're becoming an important part of this." His words were a compliment, but they sent a chill down Ingrid's spine. She couldn't help but wonder, important for whom? Jonathan's hand brushed hers briefly as he reached for his wine glass. The contact was fleeting, but it felt like a spark, igniting a fear she had tried to ignore. She nodded, but inside something was shifting. The future she had dreamed of for so long was no longer the future she wanted. She had made a choice, but now she wasn't sure what the price of that choice would be, and whether she could ever truly escape it. As they parted ways that night, Jonathan's words echoed in her mind. "You're doing well, Ingrid. You're becoming an important part of this." Important for whom? Ingrid woke up early the next morning, her heart heavy with the weight of the choices she had made. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection, but the woman looking back at her felt unfamiliar. The glossy hair, the carefully applied makeup, the designer clothes, it was as though someone else's life had been stitched onto hers. She had become a part of Jonathan's world, but in the process, she had lost herself. The woman she had fought to be, the woman who had struggled to give her daughter a better life, was slipping away. She thought of Lily. Her daughter had blossomed into a confident, happy young girl, and Ingrid had done everything in her power to give her that future. But at what cost? Every moment she spent in Jonathan's orbit seemed to pull her further away from the woman she had once been. The promises Jonathan had made now felt like chains, and the fear that had been creeping up on her was now undeniable. She couldn't keep living like this. Not for herself, and certainly not for Lily. The decision was made, but it wasn't an easy one. It never was. That afternoon, Ingrid drove to Jonathan's office. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. Her mind was a blur of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, regret. But most of all, it was filled with a need for clarity. She had let him into her life, into their lives, but now it was time to take control again, to stand on her own. When she arrived, the receptionist greeted her as usual, But Ingrid barely noticed the polite smile or the practiced politeness. She walked through the sleek, modern hallways with a determined stride, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors. Jonathan was waiting for her in his office, standing by the window as he always did. This time, when he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable, a carefully crafted mask of professionalism. "Ingrid," he said, his voice warm, but there was something in it that Ingrid couldn't quite place. Was it disappointment? Impatience? "I wasn't expecting you today. I need to talk," Ingrid said, her voice steady. She walked into the room and closed the door behind her, cutting off any possibility of retreat. This was it, the moment she had been avoiding. Jonathan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Ingrid sat down, but her eyes didn't leave his. "I've been thinking about everything," she said slowly, her words measured. "About the life you're offering, about what it means for me, for Lily. And I've realized that I've been looking at it all wrong." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, the slightest trace of amusement flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I thought I could have it all," Ingrid continued, her voice gaining strength. "I thought I could accept your help without giving up who I am. But I've learned something about myself, about us. This isn't the life I want. It's not the life I promised Lily." Jonathan's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Ingrid saw a flicker of something else. Anger, perhaps, or frustration. "You're being naive, Ingrid. You can't just walk away from everything I've done for you. You owe me." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm now, no longer hesitant. "I don't owe you anything. You've given me opportunities, yes, but at what cost? I've lost myself in this. I don't want to be part of your world anymore, Jonathan. I want to rebuild mine. For me and for Lily." There was a long silence between them, the air thick with unspoken tension. Jonathan studied her, as if weighing her words, deciding what to do next. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "You can't just walk away from everything. You think it's that simple?" "I'm not walking away from everything," Ingrid said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'm walking towards something, a future that's mine, ours." Jonathan didn't respond immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were considering the weight of her words. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and heavy. But Ingrid held her ground. She had made her decision. She was done waiting for a future that was someone else's design. She was ready to create her own path, no matter how difficult it might be. Finally, Jonathan stood up and walked around his desk, his movements deliberate. "I see. You've made your choice then?" His voice was colder now, the warmth of before gone. "But remember this, Ingrid, nothing comes without a price. You'll see that soon enough." Ingrid didn't flinch. She stood up as well, meeting his gaze head-on. "I've paid enough already." She turned and walked out of his office, the door clicking softly behind her. As she walked through the hallway and out into the cool air of the city, she felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was hers. No longer controlled by someone else's vision, no longer tied to a debt she couldn't repay. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that, but as she got into her car and started the engine, a sense of peace settled over her. She wasn't trapped anymore. She had the power to choose again, and for the first time in a long while, she felt free. In the end, Ingrid's journey teaches us that the cost of success and comfort is not always measured in money or material gain. Sometimes the price is our freedom, our identity, and the relationships that truly matter. True strength lies in the courage to reclaim our lives, no matter how difficult the road ahead may seem. Ingrid chose her own future, and so can you. If Ingrid's story moved you, if you've ever felt like you were on the edge of losing yourself for the sake of someone else's plan, then this is the moment to make a choice. Comment below. Tell us what you would do in her shoes. Like this video if you believe in the power of reclaiming your life. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message of strength. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel, because the stories that challenge us to think, to grow, to choose, those are the ones that matter. Don't miss what comes next.